When we started to wash the skull, we noticed that she had a large deposit of new bone. You can see this very circular deposit of new bone inside her skull, and also kind of a lesion on the top of her skull. So this was some kind of brain tumour, and probably what we call a meningioma. That would have been quite a large tumour inside her skull, and probably would have come out of the skull and been quite a large swelling on top of her head. So it would have been very visible to people that she had something wrong. So I think this depression is really where the pressure from the tumour was pushing onto the skull itself. Tumour, so it would have been a brain tumour pushing on the inside of the skull. And then when you turn it over, you can see this other lesion. It's a time we know very little about, so we refer to it as the Dark Ages. So it's after the Romans left and before anything was really chronicled. And so it's a very interesting period of time to look at these individuals. What's interesting about the site is the level of pathology that we're getting out of the individuals that have currently been excavated from the cemetery. And this level of pathology is quite high, given it should be a small rural community. We knew almost nothing about early medieval cancers. In fact, it seemed to be very rare. I think of all of the individuals that we've ever excavated from this time period, we had about 0.8% of people had evidence of any kind of tumour. At Cookham alone, from that group, we had 11% of people at Cookham have tumours, which is very high. And it's actually increased our knowledge of early medieval tumours from 0.8% to 1%. So it's quite significant. It's unlikely that individuals living in such a small area of Cookham would have all had these really aggressive cancers, and they are very extreme, and they would have been very visible. And so our hypothesis is that these people were coming from a wider area and were coming to Cookham. Your teeth stop growing when you've fully formed, and then they keep the stable isotopes from your childhood. If you then as an adult move to some other location with a different geology, all of the animals and plants and the water that you're drinking, well, the stable isotopes from that geology will be inserted into your bones. So if you compare the teeth with the bones, we can actually see whether someone moved from their childhood geology to a more recent geology.
Date, so that's probably a later medieval field boundary. So what we have here is we seem to have a building coming through. So we have a wall coming through here, going round here, and coming back around here, forming a square building. We seem to have a hearth that has been sunken into the middle of the building, but its importance is really what links it to our deeper excavations here. This is the remains of a leat, a man-made channel which would have funneled water from the Thames through here and round back out. And what we believe this building is a watermill associated with this leat.
Growing up, your formative years, when you're a teenager, probably more interesting
And I think you should probably find the lower arm bones there and
Yeah.
last year. We brought it back to expose the tibias, and these guys are now exposing the feet really, really well.
Monastic communities at this date are generally aristocratic. We know from historical sources that this was actually a royal monastery. For a period it was ruled over by a woman called Cynethryth, who was the widow of a very famous Anglo-Saxon king named Offa. You may have heard of him in relation to Offa's Dyke. So she actually ruled over this establishment. So that gives you an impression of how high status these places were. And we're getting lots of archaeological evidence that reflects that high status. So precious metal dress accessories, for example, that were used to hold up monastic veil and headdress. So really finely crafted silver pins, for example. But also it's just the different elements we've got here that indicate this was an area of concentrated wealth where high value infrastructure like water mills was being constructed and used. So you just can't get at the evidence. Here, however, we're excavating a greenfield site that was never occupied after the monastery was abandoned. So we've got, as part of that, we've got a fairly extensive cemetery, probably numbering several hundred interments, made over a maybe 100 to 150 year period in the 8th and 9th centuries, surviving very well preserved for us. And this is giving us a whole series of human-centred perspectives on the communities that lived around the monastery and travelled to it. We think that there may be individuals here that may have travelled to the monastery to receive perhaps end-of-life care and died here and were buried in the cemetery by the monastery.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download Metro TV Extend sekarang.